hey now, welcome to Fitz's Electric Bar. I've been in absentia for a little bit, been a little under the weather, not necessarily super inspired, but I thought of something that I wanted to do as a kind of a theme. And the theme is loosely, I guess, based on or influenced by a travel writer that I love, Pico Iyer. I don't know if it's Iyer or Iyer. But the first time I read one of his books, it was The Four Seasons of Kyoto, and his wife's Japanese, and he talked about living in Japan and what it was like to be a foreign national living in another country, especially a country like Japan. I could relate to that because I had just moved to Japan when I read the book. But this essay that he wrote is called Shock of Arrival. And the notion of this, and I love this article, is that you never experience a place the same as you do on your arrival. So in particular, if you're arriving into a destination you've never been to, particularly in a land and a culture and amongst people that maybe you have not spent time with, and you're arriving probably jet lagged and a little disoriented, and then you start to take in all the sights and the smells and the sounds of the place. And that first impression is a very strong impression. It really hits you. And I can certainly remember that when I first moved to Japan. But I can also remember that traveling in Asia and my first impressions of arriving in Nepal and arriving in Tibet and those kinds of things. But sometimes it's like burned into your psyche, and you can almost convey those smells and sights and sounds at will, if you think about it, because it was so impactful at the time. And the other notion of this is that nothing will be the same again. That first time is always going to be unique, and you will be processing it differently over time, and your experience of that place will be different over time. So I'm going to quote a little bit off of this Shock of Arrival, Pico Iyer, I-Y-E-R. He talks about vulnerability and openness. He describes the traveler as being at their most responsive and vulnerable during arrival, comparing it to love at first sight or the first kiss. He also talks about the innocent eye. I'm taking this all off of AI, by the way, nice little summary. The innocent eye, Iyer often discusses the, quote, quest for the unknowing. By arriving in a place where no one knows your resume or your past, you are free to reinvent yourself or see the world without the filter of your usual certainties. A large part of arrival consists in seeing some of the things that you will later come to know and not seeing others. Home is the place that will never excite one in the same way, precisely because so much of what it means lies in the past. It is the place where one can never arrive for the first time. So it's almost a riddle there, but I'm taking this as a starting point or a thought about music, of course. This is Fitz Electric Bar, after all. And so transferring those kind of thoughts about when I remember something, either hearing it for the first time or experiencing something really viscerally and it completely changing for me. And in most cases, this would be the first time I heard this particular artist or band and the impact it had on me. But in other cases, it might be a left turn or something by that artist that I hadn't expected. And so let's jump in. One of the first ones for me, and of course, all of this about the unknowing eye and being vulnerable, when you're in your teens, you obviously are an emotional sponge, absorbing things, bringing meaning to those things. But the album that I remember just blowing me away was the first time I heard Roxy music. I might have heard Stranded. I don't know if Stranded was before this or not, but because of the chronology, sometimes you're not hearing things at the moment that they're released. But For Your Pleasure, this record for me was just a mind blower. So I will confess that it was around the time that I was getting into, let's just say, mood enhancers of the now legal kind. And listening to this record just absolutely blew me away. So you've got, of course, this incredible cover or inside where they're all holding guitars, even though they're not all guitarists. Brian Eno there, Phil Manzanera, Brian Ferry is no more for piano, not really guitar. And I guess that's Andy McKay there, and Paul Thompson, the drummer. Why was it that this left such an impression on me? Well, sometimes it's hard to put things into words, but this for me was so out there. You've got the beauty of Grey Lagoons, which is one of the most beautiful ballads, I think, and beautiful vocals delivered by Brian Ferry. The Bogus Man, which kicks off side two, is a very trippy one, and definitely one that if you're enjoying your recreationals, that song with Eno's bizarre kind of ambient keyboard stuff happening in the background. It sounds now, I suppose, fairly elementary, but at the time it seemed like really transformative. The Bogus Man, For Your Pleasure, great track as well. Do the Strand, just a great, I mean, this is all pre-punk, and not that Do the Strand was punk, but it had a kind of manic quality to it that I just thought was amazing. And, closing out side one, In Every Dream Home a Heartache, probably one of the sort of wildest, explosive songs of that time. So I was in high school. I think I was in grade 10 or grade 11 when this came out, and still, sits with me as just a transcendent, fantastic album that had a big, big impact on me. Kind of moving roughly chronological. I was familiar with Eric Clapton, but I was not a Blind Faith fan or a Yardbirds fan. I was pretty meat and potatoes, 70s rock and roll stuff I mentioned many times before. And of course I knew Layla, but the album that for me got me really into Clapton in any kind of fashion was actually this record, and a live record, Derek and the Dominoes in concert. This was recorded at one of the Fillmores. Was it the Fillmore East or the West? Fillmore East. And the musicianship, I love the rhythmic stuff going on. And side one in particular, Why Does Love Got to Be So Sad? And then Got to Get Better in a Little While. Those two tracks really blew me away. And this became a stalwart album for me in high school days. Now, moving forward to university times, I mentioned this before, but, I knew Neil Young. Nobody could escape, Old Man or Heart of Gold or things like that. If you were in 76, 77, really getting into music, you would know of those. And after the gold rush, you would have known those songs. But they didn't really grab me. It didn't really do much for me until somebody played, at the time off of Decades, played me Like a Hurricane. And it was kind of like I'd never even heard this guy before. It just completely opened everything up for me. The guitar playing, the driving forward momentum of the song. And it began for me an absolute deep love affair of all things Neil Young. I think there may be no artist, even Dylan, that I have as deep a love for as I do with Neil Young. And this was probably my second record that I went out and got. Not exactly his best, but it has Like a Hurricane on it. And I was, even though maybe this isn't such a fantastic record, it is the diversity I became aware of the fact that this guy does a lot of different stuff, a lot of different styles. On the side that has Like a Hurricane, it's got Star of Bethlehem, which is just sort of like a really nice, simple sort of folk song. And you've got, the vocals of Emmylou Harris. That probably was my introduction to Emmylou Harris. And some of the other band members, Ben Keith and Tim Drummond, who I don't know if they're part of the Stray Gators and played on Harvest, but anyways, it's kind of got a little bit of that feel. Will to Love is fantastic. It's again, it's a real and ambient kind of thing. In terms of, I think it was recorded in a house with a fire burning in the fireplace. You can hear the wood crackling and everything, and it's just outstanding. Like a Hurricane, third track, completely different, just a 180-degree shift. And then Homegrown, not really one of my favorite songs, but Neil Young, Like a Hurricane, just opening me up to the beauty that is Neil Young and a lifelong love affair with Neil Young. Now, there was a lot of punk stuff that I really loved, and I think about things like, I actually didn't love The Clash when I first heard them, but when I heard White Man and Hammersmith Palais, I was suddenly hooked. And I actually like Give 'Em Enough Rope more than I did the first record. I know that's sacrilegious. And Anarchy in the UK was like a huge one. God Save the Queen and Anarchy in the UK, when those two singles came out, it became the beginning of a whole change in my listening habits. But the song that just completely floored me, partly because my expectations were different than what was delivered, was the title track "Public Image" off of Public Image Limited's "Public Image," so the album self-titled track. The bass of Jaw Wobble was really different than what the Sex Pistols were doing. And then was it Keith Levine, the guitar work, just kind of weaving in and out. I mean, this was just outstanding. And on top of that, the beginning, right? You're wondering what's Johnny Rotten gonna do? And of course, he changed his name back to his real name, John Lydon. But what is he going to do after the Sex Pistols? How can he top that, right? You never listen to a word that I said, and he's continuing on with the berating, but it's a distinctly post-punk kind of sound, really one of the first post-punk records, I would say. And also with Jaw Wobble's bass, it's beautiful, just a heavy, it's almost like a dub bass that he's playing. So Public Image, off of Public Image Limited self-titled record, that was a searing memory for me. Another one was I was traveling to New Orleans and I heard about this band. I'm not sure if I got the order of events and chronology correct, but my friends Stu and Dana, who were traveling with us, we were talking about Low. I don't know, Stu often introduced me to a lot of great stuff. And I got this record, Things We Lost in the Fire. And Steve Albini produced it, but what really just completely floored me with this record when I first heard it was the vocal intertwining of Alan Sparhawk and Mimi Parker. There are many great male-female combinations. Of course, Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris. You've got Exene Cervenka and John Doe, and I love all of those. But in terms of the melding of voices, really singing co-lead of Mimi Parker and Alan Sparhawk, to me, nothing better than just listening to this record right off the top, Sunflower, and then Dinosaur Act. And this is such a great record, and this also introduced me to what became a lifelong love of Low. Saw them live a few times, and yeah, it's never been the same. I do like Alan Sparhawk very much. It's not fair to hold him up to the standards of what Low was, but we have their music, so that's fantastic. Now, most of the time, these kind of searing first impressions, if we kind of think back to what Pico Iyer was saying in that travel article, Shock of Arrival, the power of youth, when you're young and you're absorbing all this stuff. I don't think usually it is quite as visceral and as powerful usually as you get a bit older. That may be just me, but that's my experience. But I was really struck with a track off of one of these Late Night Tales. This is the Cinematic Orchestra. These compilations are fantastic. I really recommend them. They're great for introducing, like they create a mood and they introduce songs that you may or may not know. And there's definitely a discovery here, and that was Terry Collier. And the song is You're Gonna Miss Your Candyman. And it's this great driving, groovy sort of funk tune. And it has this great sort of, it starts really like nice and slow and builds tension. And then it kind of like really expands and becomes a wild expression. And then it shrinks again, and then it expands again. And it does that 2 or 3 times. And when it really explodes, it's just this beautifully rhythmic powerhouse. And that was really just about 4 years ago or something that I discovered this. And so I got the record that appeared on, which is Terry Collier's What Color Is Love, which is a great record. he's a guy that has gone through so many iterations. There's the recent re-release of this kind of folk blues gem, the new folk sounds of Terry Collier, which is really awesome, but it's completely different than some of the works that he did later. Again, sort of channeling folk, soul, R&B, and he is somebody that, for me, is really unique. You can come up with lots of adjectives, but this one was recommended by David Atkinson. Thank you, David. As I was sort of building out my collection, this one was a record store release. Speak Your Piece. Awesome release from the Mr. Bongo label, which is a great label. And this one here, which I haven't really dove in really deeply, but Terry Collier had a connection with Japan. And so this was Tokyo Moon. And this, there is a listening bar there called Bar Music, and the owner had some, I guess, a relationship with Terry Collier. And I don't know if this is on his label from Bar Music or another label, but regardless, this was I think a Japan-only release, and maybe one of the more recent ones. And the context, I guess, was really the pandemic. A lot of us have talked about how we listen to music, differently or went deeper. I went into a very deep dive on Grateful Dead music at that time, and was listening to a lot and really starting to solidify the different eras and my preferences, and they would always change. It would vary from, the 71, 72 sort of Europe, and then the 73, 74 and the Wall of Sound, and then the 77, 78. But I digress. I'm not going to talk Grateful Dead at this one. I'm going to do some Grateful Dead stuff later, another time. But you're in the pandemic, you're feeling, I think for many of us, even if you've got a bubble, a family, you're feeling kind of alone and isolated. And this artist here, Richard Hawley, I've talked about him quite a bit, but he came into my world. I listened to him, and I think it was The Ocean, or even the track Cole's Corner, and I just love this record. The warmth. He is a real crooner, a modern day crooner. I think that his music is outstanding. He creates an atmosphere or mood, and the whole record kind of has that feeling. I also love that Born Under a Bad Sign. I love this guy, and right from the beginning, I was just completely hooked, and I could imagine it's cinematic, really. It's like a soundtrack to a person who is going through heartbreak and maybe hope and heartbreak simultaneously. So Richard Hawley, Cole's Corner. And so that's, kind of a few records that I remember really opened everything up for me for that artist, and were the impact I still feel today. Carpe diem, motherfuckers.